Greetings, everyone. A question has been posed to Imogen and myself about how do we craft a sermon? What is the process that we go through? And so I thought I would take this time and talk to you about my process. And my process is relatively consistent. Sometimes it's a little more condensed than at other times, but the elements remain essentially the same. The very first thing that I do is read the scriptures. I read them, and if I have the luxury of time, I like to take a day or so and just sit with them. That doesn't mean that I sit down and I do nothing else, but as I go through the busyness of my day, they are in the back of my mind. They're in my subconscious maybe, and I have an opportunity to reflect on them. And sometimes I'm able to reflect on the relevance of the scriptures to what I may be doing during the day. And then I write down my initial thoughts. What are the things that grabbed my attention? The very first things without any kind of censoring or edit. What are those things that popped out at me? What questions do I have for God? What questions do I have about maybe what I've read? Is there a conflict between this scripture passage and maybe another that I may have read in the past? How do I resolve that conflict? And so I write these things down. And then I consult commentaries. It's important for me to get other people's perspectives of a piece of scripture, and to understand that while I may not agree with these different perspectives, it's important for me to understand that they exist, and that I may need to be cognizant of them as I am crafting my sermon. It's important to me that I also ask myself the question, through what lens are you looking at these scriptural passages? Might you look at these scriptural passages through the lens of a character within the gospel narratives, or within the Hebrew scriptures, or within the epistles that are not normally preached on? Might you do that? And I almost always consider the fact that there are almost always different lenses from which I can interrogate the scripture. And then I should say that that throughout the process I am praying. So every day I get up and I pray about that God will be with me as I'm thinking on, praying on, reflecting on, writing my sermon. I also think about what's happening in the world today, and how is the scripture relevant to what is happening in the world today? Scripture transcends time. The message of scripture can transcend time. And so it's often amazing to me of how relevant a particular scripture may be to what's going on in the world today. And I try and think about that. Sometimes I look back in history and say, what happened on this day? What happened on this day in history? What can we learn from it? And so I pray that that as I'm actually doing the writing, that the words that I write, the message that I'm crafting, is not about me. That it is truly about a message that I believe that God is calling me to preach on. And so that's my process, friends.